So on Zoom, if you can share screen again of the program, not this weekend, but the next weekend's program, the Tara program. Let me say something about that because I think there's some questions. So just announcement. So this is the program that we are going to be offering on the weekend of March 1st and 2nd. Then March 3rd, I leave for Asia for 2 months. One of those months is for my own continued, I guess you could say, continue education and professional development in secular terms, but I'm going to this set of empowerments and transmissions in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. There's tremendous emphasis on the receiving of empowerments and oral transmissions. I did one about a year ago. That was 1 month, and then a few months ago in Nepal for about 2 months and 10 days. And Omar, who just came from Mexico, was there too for that whole time, and a number of other people from within our Sangha, our group. But this next one I'm going to, it's for about a month also, and this time it's in India. In part because the head of the lineage, His Holiness the Drigom Kyabgon, which some of you have met, he was here to consecrate the land, that project, the Forest Hermitage project. So he is starting July going into a 3-year retreat, right before his 80th birthday. Purposely, he's like, I don't want people celebrating birthdays, or his birthday, so he's going to escape before that starts. He knows there'll be a lot of big hoo-ha, 80th birthday, so he's like, guess what, I'm going to retreat, going for 3 years, so see you all later. So anyway, this weekend, March 1st and 2nd, Freedom from Fears, Principles and Practices of Lady Tara. So Lady Tara is the female embodiment of the principle of the awakened state, Buddha. Now, in some forms of Buddhism, to be enlightened, to be Buddha, is necessarily something that happens only, first of all, to humans, then secondly, to male humans, according to some Buddhist tradition. But in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, very unambiguously, it says that while that idea has a particular context to it and a particular reason to it, in a bigger perspective, that is what we call an interpretable position, meaning that position can be further interpreted, in contrast to a definitive position. So you can say in the Tibetan tradition, they do not accept that first position as being definitive. It says it's culturally, historically bound. And so then in the Tibetan tradition, there are Buddhists in female form. Then there are also Buddhists not in human form, in a kind of combination of animal and human, like a lion face and human body and so on and so forth. And so there the emphasis is on the universality of the awakened state. So Lady Tara embodies the state of being awake, and in the female form. And the principle, the basic principle, or one of the basic principles when you relate to Tara is, it is said that she protects from all fears. Yeah, she protects from all fears. But from there, we can also learn what does it mean that she protects from all fears, which is that we have to embody that position of free from fears, right? So anyway, Saturday is the teaching focus on beyond hope and fear. So exploring this notion of hope and fear, and how do we work on going beyond hope and fear? Of course, by first looking at what is the nature of these two positions, these two tug and pull and tug, pull and push factors of hope and fear, and how Tara is telling us how to free ourselves from that. Then on Sunday is the Green Tara empowerment. That is a blessing, a way for us to connect more directly to this principle. So Saturday will be fairly logical, appealing maybe. Sunday would be like, wait, what is going on? Maybe for some of you, right? Then regarding empowerment, again, there are different kind of attitudes and position towards this ceremony called empowerment. Admittedly, in some Tibetan Buddhist interpretations or positions taken with regards to taking empowerment, they emphasize being very cautious, as in it's such an important, it's such a powerful or significant event that it should not be taken lightly. And there is again, a reason, a context for that. But at least in so far as what I've learned from my teachers, and I think is a characteristic of the way that the particular lineage that I'm from, Drigung Kagyu, handles this issue, it's the fear factor is often removed. And it also, the factor of like, therefore when you do this, you are committed to XYZ, ABC, ABD, ABC. All of that is kind of de-emphasized. Then there's also this thing about, once you have taken the empowerment, the person who gives you the empowerment, you are like bound to that person, and whatever the person says you have to do. No. We don't emphasize that at all. In fact, again, referring back to His Holiness, the Drigung Kyabgon, head of our order, he routinely would say, like, my job, this is when he is giving the empowerment, he says, my job is to serve as a conduit between you and the deity. I'm here to introduce you to the deity. And then introduce you to your identity as the deity. And that's all. He says, even if during the ritual you are taught to see me as the deity, but that's just a method. Just as you are taught to see yourself as the deity. So he always says, don't misunderstand. Don't think that I'm the one giving it to you. It's not. It's the deity, in this case Tara, empowering you, who turns out to also be Tara. So it's seeing your own face, being empowered into your true self, if you want to call it that. And of course, there is a reason for emphasizing to take this seriously, but it should not be seriously in the sense of like intimidation and fear, and thinking that, once you do this, there's no turning back, all of that. We don't emphasize that because that's not how we see this. And therefore, this is also not given with that expectation, with that intention, and with that commitment. Yeah? So, in case you're wondering, oh, what kind of commitments are involved? Do I have to do this and not do that after that? No. Right? If there is any commitment, it's the commitment to waking up. In that sense, attending tonight, you are making a commitment to waking up. And a commitment to waking up not just for yourself, but for the good and the benefit of all. That's the only commitment. And that's the only really practice that we are doing. The relative aspect of practices, there's a great diversity of them, but all of them serves one purpose: to wake up, to become Buddha, to wake up both for your own sake and for the sake of others. That's the only commitment. Yeah? So in case some of you are asking and wondering about this, for that empowerment, that is the only commitment. So, okay, now let's start tonight's program. Tonight's what we're going to look at tonight is this chapter, or at least we'll ground what we're going to look at tonight on chapter 5 of this book that I'm using to help anchor our learning and investigation into this topic of karma. And by the way, if you're registered, then you should be getting these emails telling you where the videos have been posted of all the previous classes. Basically, they're on the YouTube channel of Drigong Dhamma Kirti, on that YouTube channel. So chapter 5, the title of this chapter is Regarding the World. How to regard, how to relate to, what kind of understanding should we have with regards to the world. Okay? So here, one of the first things that Ajahn Sucitto in this book points out is, when Buddha talks about the world, he is not really referring to what's out there. It has implications, of course, after all, if you don't care about the world out there, then what's the point of waking up? Yes, it has implications on the world out there. But as always, one of the fundamental points that the Buddha was making is, before there is the world out there, there is the world in here. And so long as we don't understand how the world in here is produced, reinforced, and kept going, then we will have no real understanding on what to do with the world that is out there. Because the world that is out there is directly the result of the world that is in here. Now, a footnote, right? This is not a metaphysical statement. This is not a statement about what is the status of like the physical world out there. Yeah, I would say that the Buddha would not go so far as to say, oh, it's an illusion. Yeah? To say that, oh, the world out there is an illusion, only you are real. That's a little narcissistic. I don't know if you've considered that, you know? It's like, oh, everything is just my imagination. You know, it's like, wow, who are you? You know? He's not really saying that. What he is saying is, to whatever degree you are able to grasp, experience, understand, react to as the world out there, all of that stuff is based on the world in here. Yeah? So he's not making that statement as some kind of statement to challenge what, say, physicists are saying about the status of the world out there. Right? He's not saying that. He's saying, insofar as what we are capable of experiencing of the world out there, that whole process of experiencing and then therefore responding and reacting and perhaps rejecting or rejoicing, you know, in the world out there has to do with, first of all, the world in here. And so he begins with, we need to investigate more closely how the world in here is built and how this world is perpetuated and how this world then in turn shapes the sense of self, and how that sense of self then in turn feeds into the world still in here, you know. So self and world are two polars in the realm of experience, and they reinforce each other. Before long, you cannot keep track of what produced what, which came first. It becomes this chicken and egg situation. Self and the world. Just inside, you know, don't even need to think about outside. That gets built up. So in this chapter, we see the karma, right? The cause and effect of how these worlds are built. And the building of this world is done in the same way as the building of self. The building of self. I know, you know, in spiritual, religious circles, when we talk about self, right? Immediately when the word comes up, right? Whether consciously or unconsciously, you have disciplined yourself into saying bad. Self, bad. But the Buddha did not say that. You know? The Buddha did not say that. Or we use the English word ego, right? And again, right, in such circles, you know, perhaps even next door in the yoga studio, you know, when the word ego comes out, again, bad. Actually, Buddha did not say that. Buddha did not say that. Maybe in some spiritual traditions, or maybe not just not even traditions, like, you know, there's some systematic presentation about this, but in popular writings about how to be spiritual, how to be a better person, right? I think we talk a lot about ego. Need to get rid of ego, need to kill the ego, need to remove the ego. Actually, Buddha did not talk about that. Buddha did not teach that. We want to pay attention on how we use language, how we use words, because that shapes. That's part of the, we will see later, this is called nama, naming. And Ajahn Sucitto says, less literally, perhaps more illuminating what nama means is interpretation. So there, he says there is the process of naming. So we use words. Words is part of naming. But if we don't pay close attention to what kind of naming is going on, we give it a reality that has no basis. So the Buddha is not interested in slaying the ego, overcoming the ego, destroying the ego, maybe it's surprising, wait, what? I thought this is what it's all about. No. What the Buddha wants us to see is the moment-to-moment process of self-making. Yes, of course there is a self. But this self doesn't exist in the way that we habitually think or feel or assume that it exists. Which is that we think, we feel, we believe that this self exists as an immutable, unchanging essence. And the Buddha had no interest at all in such a self, actually. He says, such a self, he says, is at best speculation, at worst, a fantasy that gets in the way. He says, leave that alone. However, whenever a feeling of I turns up, and turns up very strongly, he says, right there, he says, please look closer at this feeling of I. Lean into that and see. What is the status of this I? Whether this I is happy or sad, that's when it turns up strongly. If you really pay attention to this sense of I, or this sense of self, you see that actually it's rather fluid. There are moments in a day where it's barely noticeable, right? There are moments in most moments of the day, barely noticeable. Certain things happen, a very strong sense of I comes up. And then either a strong sense of I that we like, we cannot have enough of, or a strong sense of self that makes us miserable, that we want to get rid of. Buddha says, look at the karma, the cause and effect of such selves turning up throughout the day. Then we begin to understand more the mechanics of self-making, and in turn the mechanics of world-making. And as the world becomes more and more solid and heavy, then that sense of self also becomes more stubborn, more rigid, more certain. And it can rally around all kinds of things. Material things, immaterial things, and ideal. Even world peace. Or just Greenpeace sometimes. Either way, the sense of self and the sense of the world gets built. And all of this is karma, cause and effect, causality. So here in this chapter, Ajahn Sucitto is inviting us to look into the cause and effect of how such worlds are produced. So he begins the chapter by relating how he was gifted, a piece of calligraphy by a Chinese monk. And the translation of this calligraphy that has two characters, two words, is bright reflection, which then later it was explained to him as the quiet reflective mind that regards the world. I suspect what the Chinese monk wrote in Chinese is 静照. 静 as in like quiet, and then 照 is to illuminate. So it's kind of, these two words are kind of in contrast. Quiet, still, and then illuminating. So here, Ajahn Sucitto say, there is attention there, but non-involvement, dispassion. Yet that mind keeps regarding the world, not ignoring it, and that implies compassion. But quiet and still. So we will circle back to this notion. But in a way you could say that is the kind of karma that we are trying to create or to develop in our lives. This ability to have this still and quiet on the one hand, and bright and illuminating on the other hand. So he says, what is this world anyway? When we talk about the world that we should regard, what is this world anyway? So he says, there's a lot of things we could say about the world. Like now we say, the world is in a very difficult place. But here, as he says, however, in referring to the world, the Buddha was generally focusing on the personal internal world, the web of causes and conditions which arises dependent on the consciousness that participates in bodily life. And so this world is experienced as a series of shifting forms that arise dependent on seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, moment by moment data which are tagged together by our minds to form a solid three-dimensional realm. Through our senses, we gather a bunch of experiences. Then these experiences, with regards to, that arise with regards to sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, right, produces a three-dimensional realm within us. When you say, oh, that is so beautiful, what are you really saying? When we see something and we say, oh, that's really beautiful, what are we really saying? It's not a trick question.
I like that.
Okay, but what are we saying about
shapes and colors?
Yeah.
Appealing.
We've judged it. It fits within our idea.
It fits within our idea, okay, and shapes and colors are pleasing, right?
Like really present with it, it fully captures our attention.
Fully captures our attention. Are we really saying anything meaningful about what's out there?
It's all better.
Yeah, I mean, not denying that there's something out there. That's the part where I say don't be narcissistic and say, oh, that's not what the Buddha is saying, It's saying, when we say, oh, that's beautiful, what we are saying, which doesn't match reality, is there's beauty out there. But as we have this expression in English, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's a very Buddha statement. I mean, really. Conversely, oh, that's ugly. We're not really saying anything about what's out there. We're talking about the beauty and the ugly that exists in our inner world, which can be as three-dimensional, as what's out there. That's what we are saying. Okay? Now it's not all just completely relative, okay? Try to remember that in earlier chapters, Ajahn Sucitto says, at the same time the Buddha does say, there is something objective about bright karma and dark, heavy karma, bright and light karma. We have looked at how in earlier chapters it says the Buddha also very insistent that, right, good and bad in that sense, happiness and suffering in that sense, it's not some kind of relative matter that changes simply because you decide to turn it upside down. There is some universal standard of happiness and suffering that you cannot deny. I think part of the chaos that we're experiencing now is misapplying this relativity. Then everyone is entitled to, whatever I think must be true. But no, there are. But within that understanding, here, the Buddha is pointing at something else, pointing at the nature of our experience and how our experience, how strong a role that our experience plays in how we experience the world. So now, to the casual observer, this reality persists through time. But when it's more deeply and directly known, this world is not experienced as a fixed and stable entity, but as arising a moment at a time. So then here he gives a very good definition of what the Buddha called dependent arising. Meaning that all experiences, everything, they arise. And here you can apply this to how they arise out there for sure. Dependent arising. But more importantly, the Buddha wants us to pay attention to how experiences, reality arise in a dependent way, interdependent way within our own process. And so he says, furthermore, it is dependently arisen. That is, form becomes present for us dependent on consciousness. Yeah, so there may be an object, a physical form, a physical object out there, but until consciousness is present, that form is not present to us. Yeah? And so form becomes present for us dependent on consciousness. And consciousness arises dependent on some form to be conscious of. So, again, this kind of chicken and egg, which comes first? Right? In detail, so zoom in further, mind consciousness arises as the interpreter and organizer of sense data and heart impressions. Yeah, so when we see something, right, there's the sense data, but sense data also produces heart impressions. So this is the manas and the chitta that he was talking about in earlier chapters. That when we experience something, both these things are going on. Then there's an aspect of the mind that is just delivering simple data. This is square as opposed to round, as opposed to flat. The temperature is this, the texture is that. On the basis of that, heart impressions form. Right? That's the like, kind of like, don't really like, can't stand, and sometimes more subtle, sometimes more obvious. So these heart impressions, okay? Without that input, mind consciousness does not arise. It makes contact, thus generating perceptions that evoke feeling. Feeling and perception arise with contact, and with contact comes more heart impressions and patterns. And then these heart impressions and patterns form into programs. Programs that further interpret what is it that is being experienced, starts organizing them, and then again producing responses to the impressions that have turned up. And he says, and in this way, that world inside becomes more and more complex. And if you're writing memoirs and stuff like that, then more stuff to work with. The more tortured you are, the better your memoir. Happy people don't become famous poets or novelists. Which is to say, if you find yourself unhappy, don't feel so bad. Try developing your writing skills. You got to figure out, where your strengths are. Yeah? And also know that, after becoming famous, you may become happy and then you can't write anymore. But it's okay, So this is, I mean, it sounds like I'm just teasing or joking, but no, this is what the Buddha is teaching us, Like even if you have understanding, right? Even you're gripped by sadness, there is a certain level of, it's not such a big deal. It's part of being human. Sit with it. Sometimes you can work with it, sometimes you cannot work with it. And even when you cannot work with it, it's not such a big deal. It's not such a big deal. Yeah? So anyway, we come back here, yeah? All this interpreting and organizing and feeling is summarized as nama, a technical term in Sanskrit, nama, which literally means name. Right? Sanskrit and European languages, they're from the Indo-European family, so there's a lot of cognates. So nama, name. Although interpretation might give you a better handle on it, it is through the linking of name to form that an apparently outer world and an inner world codependently arise in the dynamic experience of consciousness, name, and form. Basic consciousness gives rise to name. And name, basic consciousness, right? Contacting form allows naming to take place. Naming kind of brings into focus what that form is to you. Yeah, mind you, it may not be universal. Yeah, so you have people who go, "Ooh, yuck, blue cheese." Ugh. And then you have people who go all over the place looking for blue cheese. It's not a given. I mean, there's something there. But how it is named changes your experience. Right? To illustrate this, in the act of seeing, a visual object is first detected, then lingered over as the mind recognizes it and designates it with an impression, perception, or felt sense, such as friend or stranger. Dependent on that and the current mood or intent, then a response arises. One can then linger further and develop possibilities and plans. Regarding all this, we may feel uplifted, overwhelmed, or bored by all the sankhara, all the formation, the energies and the emotions that come up. That's the point of formations. Accordingly, the world may seem exciting, dreadful, or humdrum, but it is conditioned, created, and creative. More importantly, you don't get to the end of the personal upheavals until you have got to the end of your world. And how do you get to the end of your world? And here, your world means, this world that you have no understanding of. And getting to the end of this world doesn't mean destroying this world, meaning getting to the bottom of how the heck does this world work? Where did it come from? Rather than, well, it's always been there. And then somebody shoved me into it. Right? I mean, currently, that's how we relate to this world. It's always been there, and somebody shoved me into it. So I'm suing my parents. I never asked to be here. How dare they, shove me into this world, then there's no end to this world. There's no end to your personal upheavals. If you don't see and recognize that this world is not pre-made and you walked into it without rhyme or reason. But this world, first and foremost, is the world inside. Yeah? To attempt to overcome, to get rid of, to have a handle on the personal upheavals by trying to control the world out there. I mean, you can try. It doesn't make you a bad person, okay? By the way, in this system, this is the opposite of what the Buddha taught, but this is not a religion in that old sense of the word, you know? You have not offended some God for going against what God wants you to do. So don't worry. Go ahead. Try, putting an end to your personal upheavals by controlling outside. Go ahead. It doesn't offend the Buddha. The Buddha is not going to punish you. The Buddha will not shun you. Maybe the Buddha will chuckle a little bit. At most. He won't laugh at you. But until you understand that your personal upheavals will only end when you know how to end that world that's in here. Until you understand the world that is in here. And then when you understand the world that is in here, and you put an end to those parts of the world in here that you don't like, until you have the ability to do that, not much out there is going to change at all. You're just rearranging things. You're like, I don't like these friends. I'm going to go look for other friends. Then you look for other friends. Then after a while, I also don't like these friends. I'm going to go look for other friends. Then after a while, you're like, everybody hates me. Even if it is true, not to feed of paranoia, even if it is true, right? What's going to change? Nothing. It will only get worse if you don't stop about who did what out there. In the next chapter, he talks about the karma of relationships, He says there's no end, to basically settling scores with the world out there. There's no end to that. Last week I talked about, my understanding of Buddhist approach to conflict resolution, big or small. It may seem kind of idealistic, but idealistic or not, we say this is the only way that something may improve, could happen, which is before you even talk to the other side, the other party, you have to resolve within yourself, am I capable, ready, and willing to set aside this resentment? Whatever resentment you have with the world out there, whatever quarrels you have with the world out there, if you are really seeking to resolve this conflict, first of all, are you ready yet to set this aside? Now, whether you succeed in setting aside or not, that's something else. But until you are ready and willing to set aside this resentment, than any attempts to resolve conflict by going to meetings and summits and, you know, mediation, therapy, couples therapy, triples therapy these days. It's not going to solve anything. So anyway, here he says, okay, now how do we end this world? In case whoever is listening to this, we're not talking about ending the physical world, so you never know. When super, libertarians are creating technology to surveil the rest of the world, this is getting a little... No names named, but you can look up who I'm talking about. So here says, the Buddha says, regarding the world this way leaves open the possibility that each of us, through purifying our naming processes, can affect how the world seems and how we respond to it. Purifying our naming processes. To this end, many of the Buddha's teachings are based on generating bright karma in daily life, because this is how we purify. This is how we clean. This is how we clean this naming process. Because so much of our naming behavior, our naming programming is messed up. It's compulsive. And so, to this end, many of the Buddha's teachings are based on generating bright karma in daily life. He taught the Eightfold Path to establish purity of intent. If you work with this with regard to people, duties, and events, you can live with self-respect, gladness, and equanimity. You don't get caught up in the judgments of success, failure, praise, blame. Instead, you establish your path, linger in and savor the good, and work with what arises. You stop getting caught up in that compulsive way, in that circle. That's the meaning of samsara, the circle. Right? You stop getting constantly pulled back and sucked into this circle. By. So you see how this generating of bright karma is not just how we think about morality. It has moral implications, of course, So I think one of the strengths, you could say, in a way, of course, it could go to an extreme. One of the strengths of, I think, Western emphasis on morality is the idea of justice, doing right by the other, right? And so it's an admirable focus. Yeah, I don't think we need to say, oh, that's wrong, But having said that, Buddha's teachings, right, seemingly also is about that. No. That is just a kind of side effect of something that the Buddha saw as more basic, which is this issue of bright karma. Yeah? Because this bright karma creates a healthy sense of self. And this healthy sense of self is a good self to have. Footnote, as long as we know that it's also not a thing. It's a process. It's dynamic. It changes. But in all this change, if you establish a pattern, if you establish a program of brightness, of lightness, then it will keep unfolding that way. So this is what the Buddha's program. This is the Buddha's program. This is what the Buddha recommends that we do. Once we begin to understand how the self arises, and in relation to the self, how the world arises. But if you have not developed this skill, this purifying of intent, this clarity of intent, based on bright karma, right? If we have not developed this, then everything that we do, is driven by, he says, how long is it going to take for me to achieve my goals? That's the world arising right there. It's a race that can never be won because the thirst to achieve creates the goal and the self who hasn't achieved it. You climb one mountain, then you need to climb a higher or a more risky one. What's driving you? This process will always create stress. Stress can end. Suffering can end in accordance with the degree with which one can relinquish that thirst, that goal orientation, that kind of self, a compulsive, neurotic self. To do that, the next section of this text, he talks about what's called in the Theravada tradition, is called the parami. In the Mahayana tradition, in Sanskrit, we call it the paramita. Parami or paramita is often translated as going beyond. Going beyond. That which takes you beyond. Beyond what? Beyond this compulsive existence, beyond this confused existence. So sometimes translated as perfection. Now that could be triggering for some people, these kind of type A personalities, perfection, yes, let's keep working on the perfection, Ajahn Sucitto here calls it firm feet, firm ground. Establishing firm grounding. And then having firm feet as you walk this path. So he says, you need to develop these strengths. Having parami. This is a common phrase in Thai Buddhism. Like the importance of developing parami. The importance of building up these firmness. What kind of firmness? Right? On the one hand, we talk about being fluid, right? Being open, not to get fixated. But then at other places, we also talk about gaining firm feet, firm ground. So here, the list of the 10 is generosity, morality, renunciation, discernment, persistence, patience, truthfulness, kindness, resolution, and equanimity. Through the practice of parami, we cultivate action that places qualities rather than self-image as the guides on the path. It is pretty fundamental. Without that view and without sustaining that aim and resolve, you don't have a firm and reliable foundation from which to meet life. Right? In the Mahayana tradition, there's also 10 paramitas, but more commonly they speak of 6 paramitas. Generosity, morality, or my preferred translation, disciplined conduct, then patience, then zeal or energy, diligence, then concentration, and then discerning wisdom as the 6. So these are qualities that we want to build. We want to build up. We want to make stronger and stronger. Because it is from these paramis, these going beyond, that we don't get dragged around by these neurotic compulsions of the old programming. So here in this chapter, you can read that yourself. He talks about how these different qualities here, the different strengths that you build, how they mutually reinforce each other. And these are all the elements for building a healthy sense of self. There's no problem operating with a sense of self as long as 2 things. You know the good materials to use to build the self, and you know that self is always something built. Yeah? That it's something fabricated. Yeah? So what's the point of that? Oh, they are fabricated and not given. What's the take-home lesson there? Changeable choices can be made. No one is ever stuck. It's changeable. Choices can be made. So Buddha has no quarrels with the mechanics, the basic mechanics of how things come to be. His quarrel, so to say, if he has a quarrel, is us not seeing that. And then blindly groping in the dark and making up all sorts of things, then bring us and bring other trouble and suffering. Yeah? There's one very funny section. I want to call your attention. I'll read for you this, and then I'm going to pause and say, let's have a discussion. So here, right, he talks about how under this section on latent tendencies, stuff rises up. So he says, as you train in the practice of these parami, and then we work on purifying, clearing the way we name, and in that way, clear the world that we're building inside, and in that way, right, gives us the possibility of doing something about the world outside. It says, in all of that, right, do know that there are latent tendencies that come, I mean, he doesn't say it so explicitly, but we say come from previous lifetimes. And then if you say, well, I don't know about that, then since you're born until now, certain programs, right? Certain patterns have been picked up. And you could say, based on your parents, those things are really strange, I'm 4? Yeah, 54. My dad passed away back in July. But it was really not long after he passed away, I go, whoa, I got that from him. What is this, that, Growing up, my dad has this habit of saving, like especially food that is really good, that he really likes. He likes it so much he won't eat it. Yes. He likes it so much that he won't eat it, and then in the end, you have to throw it out because food perish. I have the exact same thing. Even though as a kid, I resented that. Like, why? Why shouldn't we eat it? Even as I fought against that, I did not see that until very recently. It's like, oh, whoa. But it was, sentimentally, that was like, oh, good, I got something from him. Yeah? So even if you don't fully buy into what Buddhists believe about previous lifetimes, right? Just in this lifetime, right? And you don't need to assign blame or credit for good or bad. It's enough for you to see that, patterns are formed, So as you work on clearing those things, sometimes they can come up very powerfully. And when the Buddha taught like formal methods of meditation, of training, often they are designed in some ways to bring into focus so that these latent tendencies can come out, and then we can skillfully work with them. Now, also don't think, oh, these latent tendencies don't come up as long as I don't practice. It sounds funny, but a lot of people will have this idea that somehow, latent tendencies of this sort only come up when I start to do Buddhist practice. So then they do just a little bit of Buddhist practice, and then something goes wrong, and then they come and say, wait, is it my practice that is causing this? No. Stuff just comes up. Yeah? So when I say, the Buddha has formal methods, right, to bring things into focus, by the way, it doesn't come so easily. At the rate that most of us are practicing, probably not. Okay? So, like I said before, yes, some causes of what we're experiencing now may be the result of things that have happened a long time ago, but don't immediately go there. Just check with, what did I do 2 minutes ago that got this person, so annoyed at me? Instead of like, oh, maybe last lifetime, I cheated them, No. Just look back 2 minutes, Or sometimes even more difficult is there isn't even somebody there. Just you getting annoyed at yourself, And there also, before you go, oh, maybe it's 3 lifetimes ago, You know, just look at the cause and effect that, that is just a few minutes back, and you can often see. Oh yes. There was that little bait, little wriggly worm that I saw at the corner of my eye, and then I immediately go, whoop, and then hooked, right? That's how we get hooked, by suffering. See the cause and effect of that. Anyway, here he talks about this, yeah? He says, in this respect, Buddhist practice isn't about peak moments. It is about training. It is about strengthening and broadening commitment to standards and virtues. Even when the peak experiences aren't rolling in and your unacknowledged tendencies are rising up. In fact, the ordinary situation of living with others is a great opportunity for developing parami. Then he shares his, he says, I've grown to appreciate this integrated approach especially as I didn't start my practice from this perspective. So he even said, so it's not like, all Buddhists understand this. He said that when he first started in Thailand many years ago, becoming a monk, he was in an environment that was more of a pressure cooker environment. And there's a particular method there. But he said that was very difficult for him. But then nonetheless, he learned some things, And then later when he joined his, now his main teacher, then things kind of, that emphasize more of like, without creating like pressure cooker environments, if you know how to pay attention, right, you can actually, you don't need to stir up latent tendencies. They naturally arise. If you pay attention, you can make the kind of changes as well. And perhaps a better way, actually. Anyway, he talks about when he first started. He says, monks in this monastery will go into their section in order to review and deepen their understanding of Dhamma, these intensive meditation practice. They'll generally spend a couple of weeks in there and then return to what they were part of. I was one of the few Westerners, 3 or 4 of us, that were all new to Thailand meditation and monastic life. We had nothing to do, no get-togethers, nowhere to go, and no way of returning to what we were part of. Conversation wasn't allowed. It was, as you might guess, pretty stressful, being in a small hut all day, trying to meditate, and watching the mind jump over the monastery wall for hours at a time. The one thing that we did do together was go out on alms round, begging for food, every morning in Thailand. Going on alms round in silence every morning. It was our only occasion of being together in the entire day for this monastery. Single file, the most senior monks would be at the head of the line, then by seniority based on when you became a monk. Even 1 minute before stands in front of you. It was our only occasion of being together in the entire day. It should have been easy, just walking along, receiving offerings. But instead, all kinds of stuff that wasn't on the Enlightenment script, came up. The first person in my life who said he'll like to kill me, with an axe if possible, was a fellow monk. With an axe if possible. Maybe a Viking monk or something. Well, I did walk on alms round at a pace that he felt was too slow, while he had to walk behind me. As for myself, I can't recall having much of a violent impulse until I became a serious meditating monk. But now here I was, feeling violent towards a monk, another one walking behind me. After all, the Buddha said we should walk quietly, making little noise, so that we could be calm and focused in order to get enlightened. But every day, that monk behind me kept on clearing his throat as he walked along. That's justification for murder, isn't it? Naturally, we didn't act on these impulses, we let them pass. But it was a little bit of awakening. There was enough bright karma to have a sense of morality, even of mindfulness. However, they blew apart the idea that you don't have ill will just because in solitude no one's pushing your buttons. So, in terms of the big picture, a murderous impulse was useful. I had to let go of my idea of being a reasonable, easygoing person and focus on the tendency of ill will. And further, when I acknowledged that my solitary practice hadn't made it any easier to share the planet for a couple of hours with another harmless human being who shared my interest in awakening. The paradigm of mind cultivation had to shift. I began to understand that you don't get out of karma by avoiding it. Yeah, later he talked about, then a few years later, he joined another community, and he said in that community, there was more emphasis on action and interaction, on a detailed training in terms of ethics and frugality, and on mindfulness with regard to using what we were given. There was a lot of that kind of attention given to daily life, no competition, no achievement. It demanded energy. All-night group meditation was a weekly practice, with its 2 brief highs and 2 long lows. Patient resolve was the watchword. All this broadened equanimity and deepened awareness. And we were all in it together, so that generated friendship, even when people got stirred up and argumentative at times. That was understood and accepted. That was understood and accepted. Sometimes we go around, we are a Buddhist Sangha, we should be nice to each other, we should take care of each other. All these are just expectations. Doesn't reflect that we are relating to each other honestly and kindly. Kindly also means, to afford this place, to afford this, even when people got stirred up and argumentative at times, friendships were being built. This was understood and accepted, and we were encouraged to explore the cause of conflict and stress. The overall theme was to be mindful of whatever the mind brought up and investigate where the suffering was. It was life. It made life into a practice of parami. I made a resolution to stay with it, even though that meant getting stirred up pretty often. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts, something to share?
I think in our society, just avoiding conflict at all costs is emphasized a lot. I don't know, in personal interactions with family aside the conflict, ignore it, wait till you're over it to talk to that person again,
Mm-hmm.
and like not.
But here, the conflict resolution, again, it starts with you have to work with yourself. So he's not saying, at the sign of conflict, "Hey, we need to talk." No. In fact, relatively, well, first of all, they are English, so they don't talk that much. But it's also not the case of mediations are going on. The main point he's pointing here to is we have to examine the source of conflict within ourselves first. Yeah.
What about like getting overwhelmed with seeing a lot of suffering externally?
Mm-hmm.
Would that kind of point to working on equanimity?
Yes. Yeah, seeing so much suffering out there, right? And then getting overwhelmed. So, last week, he talked about the role of generating metta, translated as goodwill, but generating it towards yourself first. In fact, seeing suffering out there can, in fact, and this is not a judgment. That's why so much of Buddhist teachings superficially look like, oh yeah, other people talk about this, other religions talk about this. But the direction that it's coming from can be rather different. So the Buddha says that compassion can often come from a place where there is a very strong sense, strong in the negative sense here, of self. Kind of like a no understanding of the composite nature of self, and then being fixated on self and what this self thinks of as good and bad in a very strong way, and then feeling compassion when in fact this feeling of compassion is kind of like the food that this self is consuming to keep it stronger and stronger. So the Buddha also invited us to investigate this feeling sad for others, feeling like, oh, I'm this, oh, I wish you were that. So the Buddha is not saying that we should not develop compassion, but the Buddha says, start with developing metta, loving kindness, goodwill, extended first to yourself, to that world. Don't seek to destroy that world, even though right now that world, that inner world, is a source of confusion. But you have to radiate goodwill. And then you look at the mechanics of that world. Then you can do surgical work. Don't go about doing surgical work without the right painkiller involved. Yeah? So that metta is really important, radiating goodwill. So even radiating goodwill first to that inner world, and then to that self. Yeah, even as messed up as it is, last week I think I talked about, really one of the things is like we have to learn how to accept everything that is here right now first, before anything else can happen. Be comfortable in your own skin, but also know that that can be changed, whatever that skin is. So, yes?
One of the things that's emphasized in the book is right intention. And I'm just trying to wrap my understanding around just kind of how I could practice right intention, or understand in a way that I could practice it.
You say writing?
Right intention.
Right intention, yes. So purifying intention is sort of done by first recognizing what the Buddha calls the three poisons. Out of ignorance, confusions, arises attachment and aversion. So what is wrong intention? Any kind of intentions that are tainted by these three poisons. In some ways, at this point necessarily, most of our intentions are tainted by these three. One of the three, all three in varying degrees. In a way, you could say it's a given. But again, this is not judgment. Oh, you're bad, you have these poisons. It's like yelling at someone who is sick. I mean, sometimes we do that, Asian mothers. You get yelled at for getting sick. Right, May? Yeah. But that's how they show you that they care, When they yell at you, that means they care. It's kind of funny. So we should not do that. But not doing that doesn't mean like, oh, it's okay, the poisons. That also doesn't help. So we want to see, keep kind of working on, okay, there was a lot of like aggression in that intent there. Then see the faults of aggression. See the faults of attachment. And when we see the faults, we see why they are problematic, then it's a more natural way of letting them go. Rather than imposing some kind of standards and expectations, Oh, now I'm Buddhist, I should not get angry. It doesn't work, Now that I'm Buddhist, I should not get angry. Well, good luck. But really kind of leaning into it. So sometimes you find that when you recognize that that intention is marred strongly under the power of these afflictive emotions. So out of the three arises many other harmful, we call, mental defilements. How do you know they're mental defilements? It's easy. No need to philosophize, no need to come up and read up and memorize lists of things. Pay attention to how heavy or how light that experience is, and you know. If it's heavy, don't carry it around. If it is light, it's something that is natural. That's all. From there, we begin to have a kind of more and more innate sense of knowing, that dangerous, don't touch. That good, we can go towards. Yes?
So if a karmic tendency can be latent and not experienced for a long period of time until it's ready to come out, say when you become a monk, for example, then you start to work with it, trying to be more intentional about watching where it comes from. Is there any really getting rid of it, or is it just getting used to it?
Yeah, so the basic question is, with this latent karmic tendencies, so you pay attention, then they come up, the question is is there really a way of getting rid of it, or is just getting used to it? You'll never get used to suffering. If you really understand what suffering is, no amount of practicing getting used to suffering will make suffering normal. You're never going, by definition, right? When you're suffering, you're not going, hey, oh, suffering. And if you do that, then it's no longer suffering. See? So, is it getting used to, or it has become something else? Yeah. Curious minds want to know, but better to experience. Yeah? We could kind of, and there is a lot of Buddhist psychology to unpack that. Yeah? But in this approach, the approach of this book, and also I would say the approach of the early Kagyupa lineage, we shy away from theorizing, and we say, go experience it with clear mind, as clear as possible. Lean into it, and then you know the taste of sweetness. You may not be able to write a book about sweetness, but you know what sweetness is, and you know what bitterness is by paying attention. Lean into it. This is the approach in this book, and I think this is also... there are a spectrum of Buddhist kind of approaches. So do explore, if you are curious about all the other approaches, Just because I'm not talking about it here, I'm not saying they're not good, but, that's Android, It's not Apple. I'm promoting Apple here, so...
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really fascinated by this concept of nama and
Uh-huh.
this how naming things shape our perception of the world. I can imagine going and meeting a stranger, and if I
Yes.
say, "Oh, brother," in
Yes.
my head,
Yes.
it changes how I relate
Yeah,
to that
yeah.
person. And so my question, it's at the risk of being a bit theoretical, something I can't touch, is I wonder how English as a language in our time and culture affects how we name things.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah,
somebody who
yeah,
speaks
yeah.
different languages,
For sure.
Chris, could you comment on the pros and cons of English, or maybe of other languages, and how it
Ooh.
affects how we do these default namings around us, and how it shapes
Yeah.
our suffering and life?
Yeah, so English language and I have not thought enough about it to really say anything that I think could be helpful or meaningful. However, about maybe 2 months ago, and I can go look for it. Oh no, I think I left it in Nepal. There is an issue of the New Yorker that talked about language. And basically it's a review of several books on this topic. And basically there are two camps. One camp says, in terms of language, it's like language is merely a means to express feelings and concepts that pre-exist. That language is, The other school of thought says, no, actually, language shapes reality and produces reality. Yeah, and so that's the debate in this particular field.
Yeah.
So here, I would say the Buddhist position is really that chicken and egg, Yeah. Except that what we say, the latent things didn't come from nowhere, and it's not accidental, it's not without rhyme or reason. We talk about causality extending beyond this life, and so it's a build-up of all of that. So that's where it will not factor into that article. Yeah, that article might just stop at, your parents and your babysitters, yeah, as affecting that latency. But here we would say that naming that language also, right, shapes the way we experience something. And I think like across traditions, spiritual traditions, right, in the Judeo-Christian Muslim world, right, the way they talk about how when God created the world, yeah, I think in Muslim tradition they have more information or they develop this notion of the role of Adam. So apparently, I think it is in the Muslim tradition, and especially in Muslim mysticism, they say that Adam was asked to name all the things that exist, that God created. And as Adam named them, Adam also gave them a reality and kind of brought them into existence. So Adam in some ways was co-creating in some ways with God. And so later Muslim mystics really went in the direction of like this process of naming and creating reality out of names. Yeah. So there are things like this. Yes.
There's a billboard that says, "What really happened in the Garden of Eden?"
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right on 40.
Yeah. I should send them some information from the Muslim side.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, right. In the interest of knowing the truth, right?
They want to know.
Yeah, they want to know. So it's like, well, yeah. That was a hand. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna just add
Uh-huh.
some supporting
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
about what you guys were talking
Right.
about. There was a study that they did where they presented a medical procedure and
Uh-huh.
the way that they framed it gave positive and negative reactions. So if somebody said this has an 80% chance of it being successful,
Yes.
people were more likely to get the procedure done than 20% likely for it to fail. And so it's like that positive versus negative.
Yeah.
And our brains actually work
Mm-hmm.
majorly negative when we frame things in our mind. Like we're more attractive to negative thoughts. So it's like, I wonder what kind of world we're like just subconsciously creating because we have this constant rumination of like this
Yes.
negative side of things. So.
And that's the program, right? To kind of go in the direction of pain and suffering. Yeah. But it's a program. That's the good news. So you can deprogram that and reprogram. Yeah. And come from a place of, in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, we speak of Buddha nature. That our nature is awake. Our nature is Buddha. And so we can kind of come from that direction.
I have a question.
Yes.
It kind of spans both questions a little bit. So the latent tendencies,
Yes.
are these mental fabrications, so like habits, or is it span the entire sankhara?
Latent tendencies are.
Can it be just a thought, a word, a phrase?
But those are formations.
Okay.
Yeah. They have been formed at some point.
So an old thought can come
Yes.
bubbling up.
Yes. Come bubbling up.
Okay. And then
Yeah. So.
whatever the habits are that are attached to that specific
Correct.
thought, then you go
Correct.
through the sankhara.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you say sankhara, it's not like it remains as sankhara. Sankhara is not a state,
Yeah,
it's a process. At a certain point in thoughts and emotions turning up and playing out, sankhara is a moment of that process. And then it becomes this, then it becomes that. Yeah. Yes, there's a question. Thank you.
Yes, there's a question. It says, would you say a practice exercise is to watch our naming process, seeing the process in our eye-making, and see how this work helps loosen up this solid eye?
Yes, and that is sort of like the main work, but always remember, right, this is a kind of you have to have a holistic approach to it. So you can't, I'm not saying that whoever asked the question is suggesting this. Let me add to that and say, always remember that it's a much more holistic program. So you need to cultivate, goodwill to yourself as you are doing this. Then here also it talks about, in this chapter, the 7 factors of awakening. Beginning with mindfulness. Here mindfulness means remembering the teachings. Then remembering the teachings, you then use those teachings to analyze particular situations that are arising. It's not, okay, don't get this wrong, don't do it this way. It's not that suddenly every situation you scrutinize, you go crazy, or you give up, or you'll be so exhausted. Right? So you just pick one. If you're able to pick one situation per day to investigate, investigate with what? Not like, everything under the sun is used to investigate. You use specific teachings that you have learned to investigate. To analyze that situation, to gain understanding. Yeah. So here, let me tell you where this is in this book. These factors of awakening is starting on page 129. So it starts with mindfulness, then you investigate. Then as you investigate and you become, if you do it the right way, it says, you become energized. Not neurotic energy, but you become like encouraged. So you build up an energy. And this energy can then evolve into becoming like rapture, happy, because you're gaining conviction. But then that has to be kind of led. You don't let it go, led to tranquility. You want to bring it to kind of become even. And then this evenness becomes concentration, samadhi, where now things gather together. Your attention gather together. And then from concentration, then arises, here it's called equanimity. Here it means now, right? You are clear and you are firm. These are said to be the 7 factors. Another section here, we don't have time, but really helpful, is he talks about the 4 clingings. The 4 levels of clinging that we habitually get into. Clinging to sense objects, that's the most obvious one. But again, it's not like the Buddha has a vendetta against you enjoying this world. I often joke, I say, religion, it seems as if, religion, no matter what the religion, is like a anti-enjoyment cult. Yeah? Anything that is enjoyable, bad. Right? So superficially, it sounds as if the Buddha is also saying that. Clinging to sense objects. Clinging to objects of the senses. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch are sense objects, But the Buddha discusses, how clinging to sense objects brings suffering. Then, more subtle, clinging to rules and customs. Very interesting. And this is a monk, the Buddha, a monk, who gave lots of rules and customs. So just like sense objects themselves are not the enemy, neither are rules or customs. The word there is clinging. Then next, clinging to views, clinging to opinions. And that's even more subtle. Because rules and customs come from opinions, views, convictions even. From opinions to views to convictions, clinging to convictions. And then finally, clinging to impressions of self. That's the most kind of personal, the deepest form of clinging. And there, if we can kind of take one day to say, today I'm going to pay attention to these 4 types of clinging without judgment. Don't judge. Just feel. How does it feel when clinging arises with regards to any of these 4? Can you feel its weight? Can you feel its texture? Can you feel what it's doing to your breathing? Can you notice the pattern of your heartbeat? Can you notice how your muscles contract or release in the presence or absence of clinging? That's what the Buddha wants us to do. Not place judgment, not say good, not say bad, because that's unnecessary. When we pay attention, we know what to let go and what to pick up. And in that way, the Buddha is showing us that there is something good that we can trust within ourselves. That's what in the Mahayana tradition called Buddha nature. Yes?
I moved here from Oregon recently,
Uh-huh.
last year. In Oregon, everybody talks about politics.
Uh-huh.
And I've been informed that here it's rude to bring up politics. So forgive me if I've offended anybody. If I offend anybody here, but I found the results of this past election traumatizing, absolutely traumatizing, to the point that I completely avoid the news now.
Uh-huh.
And I used to be a person that watched the news. I so avoid the news that I even rearranged my homepage so that beautiful pictures of temples and practices would come up. Instead of being these faces, right now I can't stand it. There's so much avoidance going on. So what is it, a Buddhist, is this self-care at the moment because it's so overwhelming for me? Or is this, am I doing something bad from the Buddhist point of view by avoiding that? Should I be subjecting myself to just 5 minutes of news a day till I get to the point that I can tolerate it? You can all chuckle, but I really have struggled about this. I really have.
Try it all out and see what happens.
What, a few minutes a day, see?
Whatever. There is no good or bad. There is no Buddhist prescription on what you should do. You have to see, what you can. For one thing is, 20 years ago, right? What's the difference between 20 years ago and now?
20 years.
In terms of news.
Duration of the news cycle.
Yeah, like what is it? Some of us remember this, right? There's the 5 o'clock news, there's the 7 o'clock news, and then there's the some channels have like late night, right? Like 10 o'clock, right? And then when there's the 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and 10, right? How much of that did we get as news? Like, how many did you watch? Those of you old enough. Okay, you don't want to expose yourself, I suppose. One, right?
Yeah.
So everything that happened in the world, 1 hour at best. Now? So now when people say, oh, you have to pay attention, you have to pay attention. No, the human body cannot pay attention to the amount of news that they are selling. regardless who is in power, something more basic is out of whack.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. So it's justified when you say, I can't, because this is not configured to like consume all that they want to sell. They are built to sell. I'm not blaming them. It's just, it is what it is, But this is not configured for that. Protect yourself. It's not something selfish, Yeah. As I've said elsewhere to smaller groups, I said, if your job actually involves something that you should stand up and fight for, well, that's one context that you should engage. I would not say, oh, just relax. No, you have to do that. But many of us, that's not our job, Our job is taking care of, something even more immediate, And some of all these things are making it impossible to even, care for that, right? So anyway, one of the advantages of it being so cold out there is I don't want to go out. So we have continue. It's too late now. It's 20 minutes past. So also our Zoom friends, probably need to go. So we will, I guess, take a moment to do this, what we call, to have a moment of reflecting back and then dedicating, right? Dedicating this, we say the merit, the whatever that is positive and helpful, and dedicating it to all. And to do that, I want to read something that I shared recently. Let me pull it up. This is a classic, a Buddhist classic called the Bodhicayyavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva's way of life. Shantideva, the author, under the chapter called Vigilant Introspection, chapter 5 of this 10-chapter classic. He says, "Let us not be downcast by the warring wants of childish persons quarreling. Their thoughts are bred from conflict and emotion. Let us understand and treat them lovingly. Let us not be downcast by the warring wants of childish persons quarreling. Their thoughts are bred from conflict and emotion. Let us understand and treat them lovingly." Thank you. This book has 2 more chapters. we will not finish the book, but next Thursday is the last class for this series. Then I'm gone for a couple of months. Then in the summer, I'll start another series. That is a series on how to cultivate this goodwill, Maitri, Metta. And it will be less kind of talk, but more practice oriented on how to radiate, how to cultivate goodwill, loving kindness, friendliness, warm-heartedness as a basis for working with karma. So linking it to here, but going in that direction of practice. So that will be sometime in the summer. We'll start that series. So, good night. Thank you for coming. And see you all next week. And then maybe next weekend. Bye. I want to say